we have to dive really deep within. We have to address the deepest, darkest parts of ourselves that we never planned to look at because we judge ourselves. We judge those deep, dark parts of ourselves. Welcome back to the Wild Way Home podcast. I'm Dr. Caitlin Vella. I'm by trade a physical therapist. I've lived a lot and I've learned and expanded, and all I want to do is share this with the world. I've been through a number of really tough, traumatic experiences. I am not a victim by it, and I want to use my experiences to help shape the world and to help women. So that's why I'm doing all of this. First, I want to go over what the signs and symptoms are of a toxic relationship. How do you know if you're in one? Am I in a toxic relationship? Are we just fighting right now? I question myself. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's terrible. I don't know. Am I just gaslighting myself? And I think those are the thoughts that women think all the time. I mean, men too, but I'm talking to you guys. I wanted to cover a comprehensive list of signs and symptoms that you're in a toxic relationship, let alone emotionally or physically abusive. So we're going to go through by category, and once we finish going through all of the different signs and symptoms, I'm going to share my experience. I'm going to read part of my diary and share in reflection what I think about it and how I can identify things, and maybe what triggers I was working through, what triggers my partner was working through, because this is all about self-expansion and development. So without further ado, why don't we dive in? One of the most prevalent types of signs are the mental and emotional ones. And these are the hardest to identify because you're not sure. There's no physical evidence. And that's why we question it so much. That's why we go back and forth. And that's why it's hard with the variable reinforcement pattern of sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It's hard for our brain to understand because our brain wants us to pick a side. It wants duality. It wants, is this good or bad? Some of the mental and emotional signs are things as simple as feeling confused or constantly second guessing yourself or just feeling crazy, being gaslit. If you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells to avoid triggering them, or if you feel like you have to behave perfectly so that you can avoid triggering them. If you do things a certain way, if you're just better, that doesn't allow for two people to make mistakes, and we have to be able to make mistakes. We are humans, we will err. A sense of anxiety when they call, text, or come home. And again, we're not looking at duality. Maybe it's not all the time. Maybe it's that every so often when it goes off, your partner, you know what to expect when they get home, and you're anxious about it. Frequent guilt or shame, even when you haven't done anything wrong. And you look for the things that you've done wrong, and you're told the things that you've done wrong, but you're just feeling constantly guilty and shameful because you can't be perfect enough. That's how it felt, at least. Feeling like you're never enough, no matter what you do. Apologizing excessively to avoid conflict. Doing anything just to keep the peace, even if it means holding things inside, even if it means not saying, hey, that hurt my feelings, even if it's absorbing a tone of voice or something that upset you because you know that talking about it only makes things worse. So you pony up and you're the strong one. You suck it all in and you perform. Overthinking every word or action to avoid setting them off. If you're sitting there worried about what's the best way to bring this up, there's a healthy level of that. But if you're constantly critiquing and you spent 30 minutes thinking about it and then you still got critiqued, or if you're worried about bringing something up, you don't need to overthink that much in a healthy relationship. In a healthy relationship, two people don't always understand each other, but they communicate, and the intent is to not hurt each other. And you'll hurt each other, but there's not an expectation of perfection on both ends. And realistically, sis, if one little thing that you didn't overthink is going to be enough to just set them off, do you really want that? The next type is communication patterns. So first up is stonewalling when they're upset. They stop talking to you. This is also known as the silent treatment. They might name call you or insult you, and it's sometimes disguised as jokes, but anytime that you're belittled or name called, especially if they start yelling, they don't respect you. Name calling, insults, or belittling comments, even if they are disguised as a joke. And I have lived through that, and it's never a joke. And when it starts off as a joke and then you can't take the joke, then you're off to the races. Or when you're in a fight and they name call you or they belittle you, that doesn't feel great, and that's not healthy. Twisting your words or denying things that they clearly said or did. I got so confused by that one that I started writing things down during arguments on my phone. I would get my phone out, I would start typing, because I was like, I've never been this stupid before. I've never been unable to recall a conversation. I've never had things go over my head to that extent in social situations. And I mean, I've had limiting beliefs where I think I'm stupid, everybody else is better than me, that I've worked through. But to this level, where every fight, every conversation, I felt like I was stupid because I was being logicked of, Caitlin, you didn't understand that. How can you not understand that? Caitlin, it's so simple. It's not that hard to understand. Or twisting my words, not listening to the intention that I meant, even if I misspoke. Or twisting my words, whether I say it the way that I meant to or that I misspeak, suddenly it becomes this entirely different thing that they're upset about. And I'm like, whoa, I don't think I said anything like that. But also, if I did, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it that way, but it's too late because it doesn't matter. And then there's times where they deny things that they say or did, that they clearly said or that they did. And that was one of the coping mechanisms that I started doing, was writing everything on my phone or recording when I could. You need to check your state requirements on what's legal or not. And if you can't record without someone's knowledge, then you need to at least make it known, like, hey, I'm recording this conversation. And that doesn't land very well. I've tried it. You can also say, I'm going to record this conversation so I can come back to it later and revisit it and see where I went wrong. That way you're taking accountability, you're taking ownership, because you are. This is about you. And that was why I would do things like that, so that I could understand the entire situation, both sides, so that I could think about it from both sides and be empathetic, but also hold my ground. Because I became such a small person. And I felt so small and insignificant. And I don't want anybody to ever feel that way. It eats away at you. Other communication patterns are invalidation. So maybe saying, you're too sensitive, or that's an inside thought. Somebody who doesn't want to hear what you have to say. And when you do say something and they invite you to say something, everything is invalidated. You're wrong for feeling that way. It's upsetting to them that you have feelings. Or just plain that you're afraid to be honest because you're afraid of how they'll react. And the way that this happens is, over time, we can start anticipating, and we see the patterns in the communication breakdown, even if we can't articulate it or if we're not consciously aware of it. Our body and our mind knows what the pattern is. And so we just stop bringing things up altogether because we know, if this, then why. Other signs of toxic relationships are those of manipulation and control. One example is that they keep the score. And that might sound like, after everything that I've done for you, or bringing up bits from the past. It might be jealousy that's framed as love because they're trying to control you. They might be trying to isolate you. But all of that is an attempt to keep you under their control, which goes directly into the next one, which is isolating you from friends and family. They might monitor your phone calls. They might monitor your text messages, your finances, anything that they can to manipulate and control you. This day and age, that also includes social media. The next one is huge. Love bombing, followed by emotional withdrawal. And this one is so hard because it's hot and it's cold and it's hot and it's cold. And it's that consistent inconsistency. It's that variable reinforcement, just like when somebody goes and gambles. They don't win every time, but sometimes they do, and they get that little shot of endorphins, and it makes you feel happy, and you feel validated, and you feel loved. Because especially if you have underlying wounds like abandonment, or like lack of self-worth, or like the need for constant external validation, or the inability to self-soothe, all the things that I have struggled with, if you have any of those as a wound already, it makes it harder to leave, because you care about this person and you've been trying so hard, and then suddenly you get a little crumb. They breadcrumb you with love, and they give you this attention and this affection, and then the moment that you feel safe and that you can breathe again, all hell breaks loose and you're back in another cycle. Keep in mind, your reactions can also contribute to the toxic relationship. I am not negating any of that. I'm merely identifying signs and symptoms of toxic and or emotionally abusive relationships. I think it's important for everyone to be aware of this, so that you can know when you're in a situation that you need to leave, and also so that if you're contributing to the problem, so that you can take accountability, look inward, and say, wow, I have some shit to fix. I don't think that people do it intentionally. Most people. I think there might be a separate case for narcissists, but I think most people have intentions to do good. Most people also put themselves first and their needs, which is normal. It's human. And so then when we add in all the layers of wounds and wounds and wounds, and the way that we look at the world, and the tone of voice that person just talked to me in, and the thing that they said that just pinged me and hit my wound, now I'm going to lash out. And when that happens over time, and then you don't feel loved, you don't feel heard, you don't feel validated, that can cause big explosions. If somebody can't regulate their nervous system, if somebody can't regulate their responses and they just react. And all of this contributes to the whole dynamic. It's not black and white. There is no duality in this. And as much as we want to say this person is just a bad person, we can't. And I think that's the thing that a lot of the general public doesn't understand, because when they think of toxic relationships or abusive relationships, the image that they have in their minds is that it's all the time, and it's not. And that is where the disconnect is, because then the people that are in those situations are like, well, no, you don't understand. It's not that simple. And it can be, if you look at the amount of disrespect and the emotional abuse, the emotional neglect that you go through. And if you look at how is my psyche, how is my health, how is my life, most of the time, like if you can grade yourself and give yourself an average, objectively, you can probably figure out what the right answer is. And your gut has probably been telling you, especially if it's a decision that you need to leave. But more often than not, it's more complicated than that because of the variable reinforcement cycles. Because it's not black and white. We all contribute to it in some way. And that's why it's important to take responsibility and accountability for personal development. You have to take responsibility and own your triggers and the things that set you off, so that you're not walking around with all that ammunition. So that you can know that when you walk into a relationship, you are healthy, and you are going to respond and be kind and behave with love, instead of reacting and being spiteful or thinking that everybody's just out to get me. Next up is behaviors and physical cues that might indicate that you're in a toxic or an abusive relationship. And first is loss of interest in things that once gave you joy. If you used to love something and now you just you're detached, you're numb, you don't have interest in it, it doesn't light you up anymore. That's a sign. When you have something that doesn't light you up, unless you've outgrown it and you've found something else that lights you up and gives you those same glimmers and that same joy, something is off. An example for me is dancing. Another example for me is spirituality and continuous learning. It makes me so happy to constantly learn and love and dance and just be free and move my body. And I remember getting to a place where I just felt absolutely nothing. But one of the first things that I stopped doing was taking any time for myself, because my coping mechanisms were I work more, I sleep more, I avoid And I would internalize so much, and I would be so uptight that I couldn't go be free and take some time for myself. Next is increased stress, headaches, digestive issues. All of these physical problems can be coming from the stress in your life of a toxic or abusive relationship. The gut-mind connection is so real. I've had stomach problems my entire life, and most of the time it's worse when there's higher levels of stress. When I got into a toxic relationship, or rather when things became toxic, my health started very quickly declining. Over time, it went from having my, I would say, like normal problems, but still being okay most of the time, to being where I was spending tens of thousands of dollars just to stay out of the hospital. And I was having to spend hours per week just trying to do things that would keep me functioning. And my body was screaming for help. I gained weight. I was working out regularly and eating healthy. My face was puffy. You have so many physical symptoms that can happen because of the way that your body absorbs the constant state of stress. It's because your nervous system is so upregulated all the time. You're in fight or flight. And that's why when I left that relationship, I wanted nothing to do with anything that was loud, anything that was fast-paced. I wanted soft and slow and peace. That's how I got into yoga. That's how I got into meditation. That's how I really dove down the personal development rabbit hole, among other things. But your body will tell you when something's going on. It could also simply be that you are exhausted after spending time with them. If you remember from before, we talked about that you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, or that you're overthinking every little thing because you don't want to set them off. That's exhausting. Another cue might be hiding parts of your life or parts of your personality. If you feel like you have to keep a certain section of your life or of you out of the relationship and you can't be authentic in every way, that might be a cue that you don't feel safe in that relationship or emotionally safe to be that vulnerable and to show all the parts of yourself. I think an example for me, that one, is when there's so much fighting, it pushes you as a woman more into your masculine, especially if you constantly feel attacked. And so I was uptight and I didn't feel emotionally safe. And so I pushed away a lot of my like fun flowiness. And the whole time, and I didn't know any of this yet. I didn't know how to articulate it, but I knew and I just said, I just want to feel light and airy because I felt so heavy. I felt heavy in my head. I felt heavy in my body. And I just wanted to feel light and airy. And what I know now is I wanted to feel flowy, and I wanted to feel feminine, and I wanted to feel joy again. And I was leaning so far into my masculine energy with the directness and the defensiveness and the having my guard up that it completely obliterated the other half of myself, and I lost who I was. And I'll make an entirely other episode on that. So hiding part of your life, maybe some of your accomplishments or your personality, all cues that things might not be okay. Another indicator might be crying more often, but not knowing why. Maybe something didn't necessarily upset you. I've been in the situation where I was so stressed, and then finally I get to the gym and I'm not sad, but you do something that's exerting and your body just snaps and you just start crying. It's because the stress has added up to be so much that your body can't handle it. The next one is flinching when they raise their voice. And I started doing this before anybody ever even put their hands on me. And it was because I didn't know what to expect, but also my nervous system was in such a fight or flight that anything that was loud was just another insult to the system. It was more external stimulus that I just couldn't tolerate. And so I started flinching and reacting in that way. And what that turned into was I would be sitting wherever and I would just start shaking uncontrollably, like you do when you're cold, when you're shivering and your teeth are chattering. I wasn't cold. I didn't even have anything going on in my head. My body was shaking, and my body was just violently shaking. I would just have to let it pass because there was nothing that I could do. I wasn't crying. At the time, I was so detached from my emotions that I couldn't cry. I couldn't feel anything. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel mad. Everything was just complete dissociation. And so my body would shake. Other signs of toxic relationships are with the relational dynamics. So when you're with them, maybe you feel more alone than when you're without them. You might be always the one trying to fix it or trying to make it work. You might be the only one who readily apologizes. When you set boundaries, they're ignored or they're ridiculed, especially when you feel like you haven't been treated fairly, or especially when you feel like you've been disrespected, when you've been name called or insulted, and you try to go set a boundary and the boundary gets ridiculed. Past arguments might get weaponized later, or maybe they only show you affection when you're compliant, when you do what they ask, when you don't bring up your emotions, when you're perfect. You might be walking on eggshells, overthinking everything, afraid of what's going to happen, or just nervous about what's going to happen. Maybe not even fear. And they're happy and they're showing you affection because you're checking all the boxes. But you're not happy inside because now you've abandoned yourself. And in the relational dynamics, if you look at the relationship with yourself, if your self-worth has declined since being in a relationship with them, do I respect myself more or less to be in this relationship? Do I feel worthy of love? Do I feel worthy of respect? Do I feel worthy enough to not be name called and ridiculed and belittled? What does that say about my self-worth if I allow it? So I have some gut check questions for you. And you can answer these in your head. You can write them down in your journal so you can come back to them. But first and foremost, do you feel safe in this relationship? And I don't just mean physically safe. I mean emotionally safe. Do you feel safe to be your authentic, vibrant self? Do you feel safe to share your emotions, share when something hurts your feelings, share when you have a thought? Do you feel safe to share what you're excited about or share about your day? Do you feel safe to make mistakes, to misspeak, or to leave a dish out, to leave your socks by the bed? The second question relates, are you able to be your full self without fear or censorship? Are you completely free? And third, if your best friend were in this relationship, would you want them to stay? Would you tell them it was healthy for them? Would you tell them it made them a better person? Would you tell them that it allowed them to live their best life and that there was nothing better than what they have? If you're in a relationship that constantly drains, confuses, or erodes you, you don't need another reason to leave. You just need to trust that your peace is reason enough. So next, we're going to get into my diary reading. This diary entry is from years ago, and it was reflecting on a fight that had happened when I was working out with my partner. He and I got into a fight in the gym. I can't remember what it was about, and I wasn't feeling heard. He just kept speaking over me, and he was misunderstanding me, assuming something, and he got louder and louder and talking over me, and then turned himself into some, I'm going to say, other culture-esque personality. And he bowed his hands and he clasped and 40 or 50 times just said, "Yes, master, yes, master, yes, master." And he kept saying it. Anytime that I opened my mouth, I would open my mouth and I couldn't get a word in because it was "Yes, master, yes, master." I remember feeling so disrespected, so unvalued, so unloved, so ridiculed, and so unimportant. And that's not healthy. I think looking back on that specific situation, just that short little excerpt, that moment in time, in that situation where I couldn't get a word in, the best thing would have been to create space, to walk away. Because being in that situation was only continuing to do me emotional and psychological harm. He, at the time, he wasn't calming down. It was the same thing. It was still escalating no matter what I did. Looking back on how I felt and how I managed that interaction, I wanted to be heard because I felt misunderstood. And I think misunderstood is a trigger that I would have to work through because he wasn't understanding what I was saying. and he was spinning my words into something else, or he thought that I meant something else. And whatever it came across to him as offended him. And so at a certain point, if you know that somebody doesn't intend to listen, you have to accept that it's okay to be misunderstood. What's the worst thing that happens if somebody misunderstands you? If I've tried to say, oh no, I didn't mean it like that, and it blows up, cool. It's time to leave that situation alone. So I think misunderstood was a trigger. I think yelling and interrupting were both triggers. I actually worked through, one of the very first triggers that I worked through ever was interrupting. It just continued to escalate, especially when somebody continues to interrupt you and they don't let you speak at all. And so anytime you open your mouth, they keep talking and you just feel so shut out. And so those are three that I would say that from that situation that I would work through. But even then, I mean, that whole situation was completely disrespectful. It was uncalled for. It was elongated much longer than it needed to be. And for him, I couldn't tell you how the fight started. I just remember that little piece of it, the excerpt that I read. So if I were to assume, it would be that he heard something that pinged him, that triggered him. Maybe it was that he felt invalidated. Maybe it was that something I said made him feel attacked. And now looking at attacked, that might be, was somebody giving me feedback? Was somebody intentionally being malicious? I say no, I wasn't intentionally being malicious. But that's how communication issues happen, because we all get pinged, we have these triggers, and then things escalate. And then it's up to us to decide, am I going to respond in a healthy way? The way that on the other end responded, I don't think that was healthy. I don't think that it was respectful. I think a lot of things about it, and looking back, I would have approached the situation or responded to the situation entirely differently. I think another thing too, with that fight or with toxic relationships in general, it always begs the question, why did I just not leave? Why was it worth being in that toxicity? And I think that's where we have to dive really deep within. We have to address the deepest, darkest parts of ourselves that we never planned to look at, because we judge ourselves. We judge those deep, dark parts of ourselves. And we have to ask, do I feel worthy? Do I feel like I deserve more than this? Do I believe when somebody says that I'm disgusting? Do I believe when somebody says all of these horrible things about me? What do I believe about myself? And if we can take all of those thoughts and we can string together the things that we believe about ourselves, now we have this entire booklet of these beliefs, and we can say, hey, that's not a very helpful one. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to cut that out because that is doing me no favors in my life. And so I think if we can approach our limiting self-beliefs that way, if we can approach our relationships, our interactions with anybody in our life in that way, we will have much healthier interactions. I hope this was helpful today. Make sure you let me know in the comments.